So one of my hobbies I've enjoyed for quite some time is making homemade beer and wine. So I'm going to go through my methods of making a boxed wine. So you see these kit wines at homebrew supply shops, big box stores, and here you see they had a special on at Costco. So I'm going to make the Chardonnay of that particular brand name. I've made these before and they always turn out great. So you can always pause the video to read all the list of ingredients and the characteristics of this particular wine. There's the list of ingredients as well on the bottom. Includes the concentrated grape juice. There's 2 bladders inside the box. I'll show you that in a second. Shows you also the preservatives and the clarifiers and other ingredients along with the oak chips. So inside the box, the first thing you see is the corks, and they give you about 63 corks, so more than enough. You have the shrink sleeves that go on the top of the bottle for decoration. The 2 packages of you include your yeast and all the other ingredients, preservatives, clarifiers, some labels, 2 packages of oak chips or oak flakes, and then you have your 2 bladders of concentrated white grape juice, and you can see they're dark here because they're concentrated. Plus you're going to be adding water, and once you add preservatives it does lighten the color as well. So I've opened up one of the packages of the additional ingredients. So there's bentonite, which is a type of clay that helps clarify, potassium metabisulfate, keelsusol, another clarifier, package of yeast, commonly used wine yeast, the instructions in bilingual, and then potassium sorbate, and chitosan, which is your final clarifying agent. So there's a bilingual list of instructions here, and it's pretty good and easy to follow. There you can see my fermenter. So the most important thing with any home brewing is to make sure that all your equipment is very clean and also sanitized before you begin. So here you can see I'm spraying some sanitizer, and I'm going to let that sit for about 30 seconds to a minute. Just let it drain off. It's a no rinse type of food grade sanitizer, so it's safe as well. This particular conical shaped fermenter comes with a little bit larger jar than the one I had in my hand here, but I tend to use a smaller one and change it more often than the larger jar that it came with. So the first step is to mix up with some warm water the bentonite, which is a type of clay. So for a full 2 minutes, I even set a timer to remind myself, but you do need to really mix it well because it does clump. And even here you'll see a few clumps come out, but give it a good stir for at least 2 minutes. So the concentrated white grape juice you're going to set up like this so that your neck is higher than the rest of the bag, and I just use a paint can opener. You can use a bottle opener as well for opening caps. Comes off fairly easy. So this can be tricky, just be careful. Put your opening in first and then tip the bag up. Try not to splash it out. It's pretty thick. And what they say in the instructions, once the bag is, you get as much as you can out, you want to add some warm water, roughly 2 liters of warm water, either bottled water or tap water. Give it a good shake and get the rest of that concentrate out. Now I did use bottled water to top up to 23 liters, so you'll see in a second here. You can use tap water. Generally I do that for beer, and I let the tap water sit in big bottles for usually 3 to 4 weeks and let it off gas and kind of dechlorinate. But in this case I'm just using store-bought bottled water. So this is a 6-gallon fermenter. You want to fill it up to 23 liters. So whether you use a pail or a carboy or another type of fermenter, you want to measure out 23 liters. That's including your water and your grape concentrate. Now with this particular fermenter, when I'm doing a 6-gallon batch, there isn't a lot of headspace for expansion during fermentation, so sometimes it will come up through the airlock, and it happened this time as well. So all I do in that case is install a blow-off tube into a jug of water, which I'll show you in a minute. but depending on what type of fermenter, you do need a bit of headspace for any foaming or expansion. So they want you to stir it for 2 minutes. This is important because you're making sure that concentrate is mixing well with the water and that bentonite is also getting into solution as well. As part of the instructions, they ask you to do a specific gravity or density. So here I'm using a wine thief to draw out enough of the fluid to fill the beaker. And they say the target specific gravity at the start is going to be 1080 to 1095. So 1.080 to 1.095 should be your ideal starting density. These kits are pretty dependable for being in the correct range, so I've never had it be outside the density range. But you want to follow, if you want to follow these steps, you can. When all is said and done, you end up with a wine that's about 13% alcohol, give or take a few points. Okay, so you add your hydrometer in there, and there you can see I'm at about 1090 and 1092 roughly. They have a spot on the instruction page where you can write and record your densities throughout these steps. Here's the oak chips. This is optional. Some people don't like the taste of oak. This is a light, I think, American oak. It doesn't really impart too much wood taste or oak taste to the wine, so it's very light. The problem I have with this is that they make it so fine that sometimes it clogs up the outlet on the bottom of the fermenter as I'm transferring. So that's why I empty that little glass jar quite often to get rid of most of that before we go into secondary fermentation. So here you can see I'm adding the yeast. Just sprinkle it on top. You don't need to stir. Place your lid on top. Make sure you have a good seal. And here I'm putting the bung in the airlock, but later on I swap it out for a blow-off tube because, again, there's not a lot of headspace and it did come up through the airlock, which is not a problem. That's why you have a sanitizer in there anyway, so there won't be any infection getting back into the vessel. Okay, so add your sanitizer, or optionally water or vodka. Some people use vodka as well, but I put the lid on the top of the airlock. And then now you're set to let it do its thing for, they say 10 days, so give or take a day, but generally it is about 10 days for primary fermentation. And you can see the oak chips moving around, and there's a little glass jar on the bottom, which I now open up. And eventually some of those chips will settle to the bottom, so after a day or two I remove that and put it back on, clean it, put it back on, and keep removing those chips and some of the spent yeast and other solids. So you can see a good active fermentation happening there. The blow-off tube into a 4-liter jug of water, and it's bubbling away there. Just an old vinegar 4-liter jug filled with water, half filled with water, of course. Okay, so it takes about 10 days, and you're going to lose a little bit every time you empty out your jar on the bottom, or if you're using a pail, if you know, during transferring. So that's why when they say you get 60 bottles out of one of those boxes, like 2 batches of 30, to me that's unlikely. Usually you get about 28 bottles per batch, generally 27 to 28. So the reason we're taking a density here, specific gravity, is to determine that primary fermentation has been completed successfully, and they want you to be in a range under 1.010. So we're just going to check our density before we move on, and sure enough it is below 1.010, and it's pretty much at 1.001. So we're going to drain off, in this case, the conical fermenter into another vessel, a carboy. Now you may have a pail that you're transferring into another vessel. So I did have a slight slowdown here in transfer just from some leftover oak chips, but it took a little bit longer. But sometimes you have to exercise some patience. So from day 10 to about day 18 according to the instructions. So another 8 days before we move on to the next step, which is adding all your other ingredients and stabilizing and degassing. So it's going to go another 8 days of fermentation. Obviously things have slowed down, and you'll start to see the wine drop out some of its solids down to the bottom, which is called a lees when you have a layer of sediment on the bottom. So some of the dead yeast, some of the solids from the fruit of the fruit juice, and some of your bentonite, sorry. So here, this is at day 18. Again, they want you to take one more density, and this is your final density to make sure that you're within a range of less than 0.995. So wine attenuates down to less than 1 basically. So they want you to be, in this case, less than 0.995. So I don't always do these densities. It pretty much is the same every time, but it's good when you're first starting out to do these 3 densities to see where you're at. Sometimes you can improve your technique or go a day or 2 longer if need be. But as you can see, I'm at about 0.990, which is obviously less than 0.995. Here's your ingredients for preserving, killing or stopping any residual fermentation, and also part of the clarifying process. So we're going to move from this vessel, secondary fermenter, into another vessel. And as you can see, with each step it's a little bit clearer. So I'm cutting open and I'm following the instructions. So the sodium metabisulfate, which basically prevents any residual yeast from continuing on any fermentation. So we're going to mix that in for, stir vigorously, it says for I think 2 minutes, so we're going to do that. And that really does a good job of halting any possible fermentation from continuing to happen. So it takes roughly 1 to 2 minutes of stirring, making sure that it's fully incorporated. Now this next ingredient is called keelsul sol. It's basically silicon dioxide. That in combination with the next day's ingredient, which is chitosan, which is made from crustacean shells. When they work together, basically they what's called fining the wine or clarifying the wine. So basically what you're doing here is not only mixing this ingredient in for what they say 10 to 15 minutes, but I speed it up by using a drill attachment. You're also degassing the wine, so it's important to get any residual air bubbles in the vessel out. So that's why they want you to give it a really good stir for quite a long period of time. But I do speed it up with that attachment, so that is an option to buy as well, as long as you give it a good stir. So this is the potassium sorbate. That's going to preserve your wine and give it a longer shelf life. And you just want to give that a gentle stir. You don't want to do a vigorous stir, because then you're going to be adding air bubbles back into the wine, which you just spent all that time trying to get out. So just a gentle stir at this point. So this is day 19, so the next day. This is chitosan. Like I said, it's derived from, I believe, shrimp and other crustaceans, but it's kind of like a glue that binds any solids in the wine, and it makes it drop down to the bottom of the vessel or to the sides of the vessel. So you'll see in a minute, and here you can see it getting cloudy. That's just a sign that it's going into solution here. But it does an impressive job of clarifying the wine to almost crystal clear, and you'll see that it will stick to the sides of the carboy and drop everything down to the bottom by day 29. So it takes a good 10 days for it to work, but you'll see it get clearer day after day. And you can see it on the side of the glass and on the bottom of the vessel. Now sometimes I have moved it to another vessel, like do an additional racking, but you don't really need to do that as long as you're careful when you're bottling. So here's my bottles. I reuse bottles. There's my corks, which I do soak. You don't have to. It said you can use dry corks, but it does go easy. It makes corking a lot easier when they are wet. And here is a bottling wand and an auto siphon. So I'm going to attach those two together, and you saw a clamp, which I'll show you how to use in a second here. Okay, so I have a piece of tube as a connector between the bottling wand and your auto siphon. So whatever method you need to on bottling day to transfer the wine into bottles, this is to me the easiest method, and they're not very expensive, auto siphons and bottling wands. It's a required piece of equipment when you're doing this. And there you can see the clamp. I use that to keep it off the bottom of the carboy because you don't want to be sucking anything into the bottles. Okay, so there's your bottling wand, which is activated by placing it at the bottom of the bottle. And you'll get you pump the auto siphon at the other end in the bottle to get the flow going, and your siphon action starts to happen. Now the bottles that you can see I'm using have a flat bottom. I like that because you don't have to fiddle with the wand to get it to be perfect so the flow starts going. With some bottles, I'll show you in a second here, they have what's called a punt or a punt, and it's an indentation in the bottom of the bottle, and it makes it a bit harder to do this process. It's not a big deal, but I prefer, if you're looking for bottles or if you're going to reuse bottles, look for ones that have a flat bottom. It's just a lot easier. So there you can see they have pretty much a flat bottom, and I'm going to show you here one with a punt. Okay. Now this was the last bottle, so it is a bit cloudy because it did start sucking off the bottom, but I just keep that bottle off to the side for cooking wine or something else. Eventually it does settle, but the rest of the bottles were crystal clear. Here's my corks that I just showed you, and we're going to be doing the corking now. And there's the corker. Place the cork in there. And you just push straight down. You have to have a solid surface, so, you know, I would not recommend a countertop. It might be sliding around on you. Now this is if you're going to be using these shrinkable sleeves to put on the bottles, I always do because I can actually write on them as well. They do stick together, so you got to be really careful about pulling them apart and making sure there's not two together, because quite often they do stick together. So I know I have 27 bottles, so I'm going to pull out 27 of them and line them up for the next stage, so I know exactly how many I need and have them ready. Okay, so I have water boiling, just a rolling boil, but not too aggressive. You can see I keep my finger well away from the water, and as soon as I put that bottle in, it starts to grab and shrink, and then I pull my hand away. So you'll see, I'll show you again. Just put your finger on the shrink wrap cap, and as soon as you put it in the water, then you can let go. And you have to do this slowly. You don't want any air to get in to the actual sleeve. And you rotate it, and no longer than 5 seconds, you pull it out, and there you go. And then you just put them in cases and you let them dry. They recommend, I think, 5 to 10 days of settling before you lay it on its side, so keep them upright. And here you can see I write the type of wine and the date on that decorative shrink cap. So there you go. I hope this was helpful for either first time or people who have done this before, wine brewers. These kits are really easy. You just have to have some equipment and invest some time. But it's pretty rewarding, and it's you can experiment with different ingredients as well. So thanks for watching. Please subscribe for upcoming videos. Bye for now.